A cold knot of dread in my stomach, a physical manifestation of the knowledge that I was not alone. The feeling of being seen was constant, Mal. It was a pressure on my skin, a prickling at the back of my neck. I started talking to myself just to feel the oppressive silence. My own voice felt like an anchor to reality in a place that seemed determined to unmoor me from it. One Tuesday night, the stench of rotting garbage from my kitchen bin became unbearable. I had missed the collection that morning. I glanced at the clock. 10:58 p.m. I had 2 minutes. Rule number 1 loomed in my mind: never be in the hallway after 11 p.m. "It's fine," I muttered, grabbing the trash bag. "I'll be quick. Down the hall to the chute and back. 30 seconds, tops." The bag was heavy, and it dripped something foul onto the floor as I wrestled it out of the can. I fumbled with the locks on my door, my fingers clumsy with haste. The clock on my phone screen flipped to 11 p.m., then 11:01. Damn it. I stood there for a moment, torn. A sane person would just leave the trash by the door until morning. But the smell was nauseating, and more than that, I felt a surge of defiance. I was a grown man. I was not going to be held prisoner in my own apartment by a list of nonsensical rules. This was my home. I paid rent. I would use the hallway if I needed to. Anger momentarily eclipsing my fear, I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The hallway was wrong. The single dim light bulb that usually flickered at the far end was completely out. The corridor was plunged into an inky, absolute darkness that seemed to swallow the light from my apartment. A cold, damp air, like that of a cellar, washed over me. It carried a coppery, metallic scent that made my stomach churn. I took a hesitant step out, my hand still on my doorknob. My eyes struggled to adjust, but there was nothing to adjust to. It was a solid wall of black. And then I heard it. A sound from the far end of the hall, near the elevators. A slow, rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape. It was the sound of something heavy and wet being dragged across the floorboards. My defiance evaporated, replaced by a pure animal terror. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. A presence in the dark, something ancient and predatory. Its attention felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. The scraping stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, pregnant with imminent violence. I felt, with a certainty that defied all logic, that it was now looking at me. I didn't even make a conscious decision to move. My body reacted on its own, stumbling back into my apartment, slamming the heavy door shut so hard the frame shook. I threw the deadbolt, turned the knob lock, and slid the chain across. My back was pressed against the wood, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. I dropped the garbage bag, its contents spilling across my floor. I didn't care. I stood there by the door for over an hour, listening. The hallway remained utterly silent. The oppressive presence faded, but the fear did not. Rule number 1 wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning. The rules weren't a prank, they were a shield. And I had just peeked at what they were protecting me from. My contact with the outside world began to fray. My conversations with Sarah became a source of stress rather than comfort. "You don't sound good, Alex," she said one evening, her voice laced with a concern that felt like an accusation. "You sound tired. Are you eating?" "I'm fine, Sar. Just working a lot. This city is exhausting." I lied. It was effortless now. "Is it just the city? You seem jumpy. The other day you told me you thought your apartment was listening to you. That's not normal, Al." "It was a figure of speech," I snapped, more harshly than I intended. "It's an old building. It's noisy. That's all." Okay, sorry," she said, her voice softening. "I'm just worried. Maybe you should come home for a weekend. Get out of that place for a bit. Breathe some fresh air." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. I wanted to run out of that apartment and never look back. But a new, insidious thought had taken root in my mind. What if I couldn't leave? What if the rules, the apartment, the things within it had some kind of claim on me now? What if leaving just made it angry? I can't, I said, my voice quiet. I have deadlines. Our calls became less frequent after that. I was isolating myself, building a wall around my new horrifying reality because I knew no one would understand. No one could. To speak it aloud would be to give it a power in the sane world that I was terrified of unleashing. I was alone with my rules and my fear. The fear, however, was a poor companion. It offered no answers, and I was desperate for answers. My logical mind, the part of me that was a skeptic and a rationalist, needed something to hold on to. If this wasn't a hallucination, then it had to have a history, a cause, an explanation. My days were now spent in a feverish haze of research. I neglected my art. My apartment fell into disarray, but I didn't care. My drawing table became a command center, my laptop its glowing heart. I dug into the city's online archives, searching for any information about the Alastair building. Most of it was boring: construction dates, ownership records, zoning permits. But then I narrowed my search to apartment 13B. That's when I found them. Small, forgotten articles buried in the digital morgue of old newspapers. The first was from 12 years ago. A single paragraph about a man, a stockbroker, who had been escorted from the building by paramedics. The article was vague, citing a severe psychotic breakdown. He had left all his belongings behind, just like the tenant before me. I dug deeper. Another article, this one from the late 1970s. A music student living in 13B had been reported missing by her family. She was never found. The police report mentioned that none of her things were gone. Her violin was still on its stand, a half-finished bowl of soup on her table. She had simply vanished from inside the apartment. The cold dread was a familiar feeling now, a constant companion. But this was different. This was real. This was a pattern. My fear was being validated piece, horrifying piece. Then I found what I was looking for. A series of articles from the 1920s, back when the Alastair was new and opulent. They told the story of the Morton family. Arthur Morton was a master clockmaker, a renowned artisan who had built the magnificent grandfather clock that still stood in the building's lobby. His wife, Ilara, was a socialite, famous for her beauty and her wardrobe of exquisite red dresses. They had one child, a young boy named Thomas. In the fall of 1928, tragedy struck. Thomas, only 8 years old, fell from a window while chasing after his favorite toy, a small red ball. The articles described the aftermath in hushed, somber tones. Ilara Morton, consumed by grief, wasted away, dying of what the papers called a broken heart less than a year later. Arthur, the clockmaker, the man obsessed with time and precision, became a recluse. He was rarely seen. A few years later, he was found dead in his workshop, the cause of death unclear. They had lived, of course, in apartment 13B. The names and details slammed into me with physical force. The woman in red, the little boy in his ball, the grandfather clock in the lobby. It wasn't random. This was a story, a wound in time that had never healed, and I was living in its scar tissue. The ghosts weren't just ghosts, they were the Mortons. This knowledge didn't comfort me, it terrified me more. It made them real. It anchored the haunting to a tangible, heartbreaking history. I was no longer just dealing with strange phenomena. I was an unwilling participant in the Morton family's eternal tragedy. One night, lost in a rabbit hole of historical building blueprints, I heard a sound that made me freeze. It wasn't the crying from the vents or a whisper in the dark. It was the deep, resonant chime of the grandfather clock in the lobby, 12 floors below me. Arthur Morton's clock. I listened, my body rigid, counting each sonorous bong as it echoed faintly up through the building structure. 9, 10, 11, 12. A pause. I let out a breath, my shoulders slumping in relief. It was just midnight. But then, after a silence that stretched for an eternity, it came. A final, 13th chime. An impossible, discordant note that seemed to vibrate in my bones. Bong. Rule number 5. If you hear it, lock yourself in the bathroom immediately. For a second, I was paralyzed. My rational mind tried to fight back. It's an old clock. It's malfunctioning. But the part of my brain that had seen the darkness in the hallway, that had heard the impossible crying, screamed at me to move. I scrambled out of my chair, stumbling over a stack of books. The apartment felt instantly colder, the air thick and charged with a malevolent energy. It was like the pressure in the air before a lightning strike. I sprinted across the living room, my socked feet slipping on the hardwood floor. I didn't dare look towards the windows or the dark corners of the room. I felt eyes on me from every shadow. I slammed the bathroom door shut and fumbled with the cheap brass lock. My fingers were slick with sweat. The lock clicked into place. I sagged against the door, my heart feeling like it was trying to batter its way out of my chest. The bathroom was small and windowless, save for a tiny frosted glass pane high up on one wall that faced the air shaft. It was pitch black. And then the sounds began. Heavy, measured footsteps just outside the bathroom door. They paced back and forth, the floorboards groaning under an immense weight. It wasn't the light step of a woman or a child. This was something else, something heavy. Thump, creak, thump, creak. A voice whispered my name right up against the door. Alex. It was a child's voice, but stretched and distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. It was thin and reedy, filled with a chilling, playful malice. "Let me in, Alex." I squeezed my eyes shut, clapping my hands over my ears. I slid down the door and huddled in the corner, pulling my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. The whispering continued, punctuated by the heavy, ceaseless pacing. Sometimes it was the boy's voice, sometimes it was a woman's weeping, sometimes it was a low, guttural growl that didn't sound human at all. Hours passed. I stayed there, shivering in the cold, dark room, my body cramping. The sounds outside the door were a constant, terrifying symphony. At one point, I heard a sharp scratching sound, like claws being dragged down the wood. It went on and on, a methodical, deliberate shredding of the barrier between me and it. I must have drifted into a state of semi-conscious exhaustion, because the next thing I knew, I was aware of a faint gray light. I looked up. A pale, weak dawn was filtering through the small frosted window. Sunlight. Do not open the door for any reason until you see sunlight. The sounds outside had stopped. The silence was absolute. Hesitantly, shakily, I got to my feet. My legs were stiff and my whole body ached. With a trembling hand, I reached for the lock. I turned it. The click was deafening. I took a deep breath and pulled the door inward. The apartment was empty. Everything was as I had left it. The only difference was the air. The oppressive, charged energy was gone, replaced by the usual, quiet unease. It was like the storm had passed. I looked at the outside of the bathroom door. It was covered in deep, jagged scratches, splintering the wood from top to bottom. They looked like they'd been gouged out by a wild animal. Physical, undeniable proof. I fell to my knees and was sick on the floor. I lived in a state of heightened, nerve-shredding anxiety for the next week. I barely ate. I couldn't work. I just sat, listening, waiting. I felt like a soldier in a trench, waiting for the next bombardment. It came on a Thursday afternoon. I was heading out to force myself to buy groceries, to do something normal. As I walked through the lobby, my eyes fixed on the grandfather clock. It looked benign in the daylight, its brass pendulum swinging in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. I was almost at the front door when a small red rubber ball bounced across the marble floor and came to a gentle stop right by my shoe. I froze. Every muscle in my body went rigid. I knew with a sickening certainty what was coming next. From the shadows of the hallway that led to the mailboxes, a figure emerged. It was a little boy, no older than 8. He was pale, almost translucent, and wore an old-fashioned sailor suit. His eyes were huge and dark, 2 bottomless pools of shadow in his small white face. He wasn't looking at me, but at the ball. Rule number 6. If a little boy asks for his red ball, you did not see him. You did not hear him. You will turn and walk away. He looked up at me. His expression was one of profound sadness. "Excuse me, mister," he said, his voice a soft, clear whisper that seemed to echo in the cavernous lobby. "Can I have my ball back?" My heart broke. He wasn't monstrous. He wasn't terrifying. He was just a little boy. A sad, lost little boy. All my instincts, everything that made me human, screamed at me to kneel down, pick up the ball, and give it to him with a reassuring smile. But the memory of the scratches on my door, the sound of that distorted, whispering voice held me in place. This was a test, the most cruel one yet. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second. You did not see him. You did not hear him. With a monumental effort of will, I tore my gaze away from him. I turned my back on the little boy and his red ball. I walked towards the front door, each step feeling like it was wading through wet concrete. "Mister?" the little voice called after me, a note of confusion in it. "Please, it's my favorite." I kept walking. My hand was on the heavy brass handle of the door. "Don't you want to play with me?" The voice was changing now, losing its childish innocence, taking on that same reedy, malicious edge I'd heard outside the bathroom door. "We could play a new game, a hiding game." I pushed the door open and stumbled out into the blinding sunlight and the roar of city traffic. I didn't stop. I walked for blocks, my heart pounding, the boy's last words echoing in my head. "I'll find you, Alex. I always find the new ones." I had survived. I had followed the rules. But the encounters were getting worse, more direct, more personal. The entities were testing the boundaries, pushing against the fragile protection the rules offered. The woman in red, the thing in the hall, the spirits of the Mortons. They were all pieces of a puzzle, but I felt like I was still missing the most important piece. My eyes were drawn, again and again, to the ornate wooden box on the mantelpiece. Rule number 4. The small, ornate box on the mantelpiece must remain closed at all times. Its contents are not your concern. It was the only rule that demanded inaction, the only one I hadn't come close to breaking. All the others were a reaction to a stimulus. This one was a constant, silent command. Don't touch. Don't look, don't know. And that's why I knew it was the most important. What was inside it? What was so terrible that it had to be kept hidden, sealed away? My exhausted, terrified mind began to fixate on it. I felt an unnatural pull towards it, a siren song of promised answers. Maybe the key to stopping all this was inside that box. Maybe it held an explanation, a history, a weapon. Or maybe it held the opposite. Maybe it held the very heart of the haunting. I fought the urge for days. I tried to cover it with a cloth, but I could still feel it there, radiating a palpable sense of importance. I tried to move it, but it felt unnaturally heavy, as if it were bolted to the mantel. It wanted to be there. It wanted to be opened. The loneliness was a physical ache now. The fear was a constant acid in my stomach. I wasn't sleeping more than an hour at a time, and when I did, my dreams were a kaleidoscope of red dresses, dark hallways, and pleading, shadowy children. I was falling apart. I knew I couldn't live like this for much longer. Something had to give. Something had to break. Tonight is the 47th night. I have followed the rules. I have run the water, ignored the woman, locked myself away from the clock's chime, and walked away from the lost little boy. I have done everything the yellow piece of paper has told me to do, and I am more scared now than I was on the first day. The rules aren't making it better. They are just managing the horror, containing it, and I can't be contained with it anymore. I need answers more than I need safety. I need to understand what I am a part of. I'm standing in the middle of my living room, the silence roaring in my ears. The streetlights cast long shadows across the floor. My gaze is fixed on the mantelpiece, on the box. It sits there, dark and intricate, seeming to absorb the very light around it. It knows I'm watching. It's waiting. My heart is hammering. My hands are trembling. But my feet are moving. I am walking towards the fireplace, towards the small wooden box, towards the one rule I have left to break. I have to know what's inside, even if it cost me everything. I reach out my shaking hand, my fingers brushing against the cool carved wood. I find the small brass latch, and I lift it.